All right, let's go through this right here. So we're talking about the table method again. So the table method. So the steps of using the table method is to first identify every possible path and its minimum completion time. Identify the minimum amount of time that each of the paths can be reduced to after crashing. Identify the new longest path. This will be the new minimum completion time of the project. And then fourthly, find the cheapest way of reducing the possible activities so that no path is no longer than the new minimum completion time of the project. It all seems a bit like gobbledygook until we actually go through it and you see it in action. So let's try it here. The activity network below relates to the hours taken to set up for a night market. By employing more workers, it is possible to complete some activities in a shortened amount of time. However, this will increase costs. The activities that can be reduced in time, the maximum amount of time that can be reduced, and the associated costs are shown below. So as you can see, we can reduce activities B, C, and G, and the maximum reduction in hours of each of these activities is 2, 3, and 1. And the cost per hour is 8, 45, and 65. So it says find the shortest amount of time the project will take to be, let me try that again, I can't read. Find the shortest amount of time the project will now take to be completed and the minimum cost involved. All right. Step 1, set up the table and identify all the possible pathways and their completion times. Enter in first 2 columns. So what we're going to do here is just identify all the different ways we can complete this. So I could go, and I'll rub this out, A, D, H, J. So this will be A, D, H, J, and the completion time will be 5 plus 5 is 10, 19, 21, 21. And now that's what I'm going to do for each of them. So I'm just going to find the next path that I could go through. So the next path I could go through would be B, E, H, J. B, E, H, J. And that's going to be 4 plus 7 is 11, plus 9 is 20, plus 2 is 22. And now you just keep on going. You keep on listing them all out. So I'm just going to write them all in now, but you'd just be finding them all. B, F, I, J. The next one would be C, E, H, J, C, F, I, J, C, G, I, J, and it's going to be 24, 21, 23, and 19. So hopefully you can see that my current minimum completion time would be 24. So that would be going through BF, BFIJ. And that would take 24. 4 plus 8 is 12. 22, 24. So that's my current minimum completion time, the biggest number there. But now what I want to do is find the reduced time. So that is, if I come up here, if I apply the maximum reductions to each of these. So if you see here, it says that activity B has a maximum reduction of 2 hours at $8 per hour. So what I'm going to do now is make all those reductions. So if I look at this one, ADHJ, there's actually nothing here I can reduce. So the reduced time just is 21. For the next one, I've got BEHJ. Well, I've got B there, which can be reduced by 2 hours at a cost of 8. So this is how to achieve. I'm going B times 2, and this 22 is now going to become 20. So what I've done there is I've reduced this B. For the next one here, I have B again. So it's just that B again. So 24 will become 22. So 22. And this is B times 2. The next one is going to be what? Well, it's going to be C, and I can reduce this by 3 hours at a cost of $45 per hour. Wow, that's a lot. So C. So I can turn 21. Remember, I'm reducing it by 3. So this 21, if reduced by 3, will become 18. And what I'm doing there is C times 3. And then the next one here, I have C again. I have C again for this next one. So it will become 20 because again, I'm reducing it 3. And then for the last one here, I have C and G. So C I can reduce by 3. G I can reduce by 1. So 3 plus 1 is 4. So I'm reducing this by 4, which becomes 15. So I'm going C times 3 and 4 and G times 1. Cool. What is my new minimum completion time? hopefully you can recognize that my new minimum completion time is going to be this 22 here. But now this is where you've got to be careful and ask yourself the question, okay, it's going to be my minimum completion time is now going to be 22, but what's the knock-on effect from this? Am I going to have to really consider something here in order to get my answer? So this is where I want you to pause for a minute and think about the consequences of saying, all right, this is my new minimum completion time. Does that simply mean I reduce B by 2, or is there kind of more things going on here? So I want you to pause for a second and have a think. I don't want you to rush it. Hit pause, have a think. All right, hopefully you had a think. I really can't control if you had to think or not. You're probably just waiting for me to answer the question, which is not the right mindset to be in. But nevertheless, here we are. All right, so what you've now got to think about is all right, if I reduced B twice to make it 24 to 22, would a new critical path emerge? And it actually would, because if I applied this one right here, if I said reduce this, then the new pathway that would actually emerge is the reduction if I did C here. So as you can see here, this is 23. So if I was to reduce B twice, my new completion time would be 22. But now this CFIJ, before I applied the reduction to C, would become 23. So that means my new completion time would actually be 23 if I applied a reduction of B twice. Does that make sense? Because remember, no reductions have been applied here. So I've actually just created a new critical path. So that means what I've done is I went from an original completion time of 24, because remember that was my biggest number. My biggest number is 24. And it looked like I had reduced it by 2, but in actuality, I only reduced it by 1. So how can I get another reduction so I can reduce it a bit more? Well, what we should do here is we should say, all right, B times 2, but now let's plus onto that C times 1. Because if I do that, then what I'm going to end up with is a time of 22, because this 23 will then be knocked down by, because C times 1 will knock it down to 22, and that's going to have a good effect on it. So that's what we would do here. So that means what I'm going to end up here is B times 2 is 8 times 2 plus C was 45. So it'll be 45 times 1. And that's going to be $61. So that means we can get to 22 hours at $61. Let's just pause for a moment and let's just think for a moment. You might be thinking, why don't I reduce C by more? Why did I only reduce it once? What if I reduced it by 2 more? Well, if I reduced it by 2, that means I would end up with what? I would end up with 21, which still means, if this is now 21, this is still 22. So I'm still in a position where this would still be my critical path. So I've just made a reduction for no purpose, because this is now my bigger number here. I've reduced this by the maximum amount. I can only reduce B by 2, which means it has to be 22 here, which means I need to go to the next lowest and get that to 22 as well in order for that to be the minimum completion time. Sometimes when I'm talking through crashing questions, I sound like a crazy person, and that's because the idea is kind of tricky, but you kind of have to get to the point where you see enough examples where it makes sense. So if what I've just said has made no sense to you, make sure to find me out and we can talk more about it. But that's the thinking that goes behind it. Let's just read through the steps here. We don't have to write anything down. So step 2 is find the new time for each pathway when all possible activities are crashed. Enter in reduced time column for the table. So that is simply going through the steps. So our second step was writing all these down. Our third step was identify the new longest path. From the reduced time column, this is the new minimum completion time. So notice that we wrote them all down. We then figured out our new minimum completion time. Then it said, find the cheapest way of reducing possible activities so that no original path is longer than the new completion time path. So do you notice how once we figured out that this is the new minimum completion time, we actually ended up with a new minimum completion time from the original path of 23. So we had to reduce that in order to make the minimum completion time 22. And that's the thinking behind it. So there's our answer. Hopefully that has made sense to you. I'll see you later.